Brian, let's jump into the defense and the pass game defense, right? And this has been a strength for Notre Dame over the last at least the last year, if not more than that. They were elite. I'm just going to say it. They were elite in 2023. They have two very elite pieces coming back, in the secondary. They should be in that neighborhood, in the discussion for elite again, depending on what that looks like. And then you add in, okay, they've got one of the best, defensive tackle tandems in the country. They've got some talent on the outside, still some question marks there, but talent on the outside, and then a young, athletic group of linebackers that we think they can get after the quarterback as well. And so, can this group do what they did last year with some new pieces and some new parts and some new faces? And can they be that dominant group once again against the pass game? I mean, that's what this is really all about. I feel pretty good about it. I'm not going to lie. This is a pretty good group coming back this year.
Well, and the thing that's going to be different this year, that's a little bit to last year's secondary outside of the Ohio State game never got tested in the way that they will to win a title this year. Here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
They didn't get tested against USC the way that normally you'd get tested because of how dominant the D-line was. That's not always going to be the case.
Sure.
And then what I also mean is after the USC game, there was nobody left on the schedule that was really going to threaten them.
Sure.
With a pass game that you had to be worried about. Maybe Oregon State might have,
but they weren't.
And Silas Bolden had a couple nice plays early, and then he got hurt.
Right.
And they didn't have Anthony Gould in that game. DJ Uiagalelei didn't play in that game. Damian Martinez didn't play in that game. So, I mean, you can't evaluate that. They weren't tested in that regard. And in Notre Dame wasn't at full strength either. They didn't have Cam Hart.
I mean, it was two different teams.
They didn't have Maris Leofow. They didn't have. I mean, you know what I mean. So it's like you just really can't. You can't. Now it's like, okay, yeah, they were great, but can they be great on the big stage? And like to me, during the regular season, I was more impressed with Notre Dame's pass defense than I was with Michigan's. But here's the thing about Michigan's pass defense, though. They didn't just do that in the regular season. They only gave up 120 passing yards to Iowa in the Big Ten title game, 3.8 yards per play. Okay, so what? Iowa stinks. Me, you, Andrew Gilmore, Michael Campbell, Tommy Guns, D-Rock Irish, Greg Lisman, Jim Halloran, Michael Parks, and two or three more people could probably hold Iowa's pass offense to under 200 yards last year. I'm being sarcastic, but like it's one of the worst passing offenses I've seen in my life, and it was embarrassing. Okay, fine. Then they went and played Alabama in the playoff and held Alabama to 116 yards passing and 5.0 yards per play. Yeah, Jalen Milroe. Okay, cool. Next championship game, they had to play Washington and Michael Penix and Roma Dunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk. All three of those receivers are drafted, I think, in the third round or higher. Michael Penix was a top 10 NFL draft pick. They threw for 255 yards on 51 attempts. Michael Penix passed for completed 52.9% of his passes, only averaged 5.0 yards per attempt, threw one touchdown, and had 2 picks. Right? Okay, so they did it every game. And Notre Dame never got that level of test. So then the question is, okay, could they be as good on that stage? And then here's the other thing. As good as the secondary was against Ohio State for that entire game, when the game was on the line, they had 3 big mistakes or misses. They gave up a 4th and 7 completion where they allowed Julian Fleming to beat their nickel across the field. They dropped an interception that would have ended the game. And they had a poor safety coverage on a 3rd and 19 that allowed to set up the game-winning touchdown. So as good as it was, when the game was on the line, they didn't get it done. I mean, that's what you're judged by at Notre Dame, right?
Absolutely.
And in Michigan, who actually gave up more yards against Ohio State, passing the football, Michigan's pass defense gave up 271 yards to Ohio State, Vince, last year. 271. Notre Dame only gave up 240. Michigan gave up 9.0 yards per pass attempt against Ohio State. Notre Dame only gave up 6.3. But in the fourth quarter, when it was a competitive game, they picked off Kyle McCord and put that game away.
Yep.
Notre Dame didn't.
Yep, exactly. They
That's
had the opportunity.
what matters.
Had the opportunity and didn't do it.
That's ultimately what matters.
Sure.
And so even as good as it was, is there another level to get to for the pass?
Sure.
I'm not talking secondary. I'm talking pass defense, because not all the issues, again, that Ohio State fourth quarter were the secondary not doing their job. It was clearly a big part of it, but they didn't get a whole lot of pressure on Kyle McCord on a couple of those snaps either.
He got to sit back there and kind of pick apart. He got to
on
sit
a couple
back.
Snap on those plays that hit. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now they got to 4th and 7 partly because they pressured him on earlier downs.
Sure.
But on those money downs, they didn't get the job done. And that's the question that this defense is going to have to answer, Vince. And, we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about the secondary.
Right. Right.
We don't have to rehash that. Part of the reason for optimism is you do return 2 stars. You've got a lot of young talent and all that kind of stuff. But there's also some concerns that you have that you say, okay, if these don't get answered, I don't know if, can this team they're going to be a very good pass defense again this year, Vince. No doubt about that.
They will be.
But will they be elite and will they be championship caliber? That's the question.
Right.
And so to answer that, we got to look at some of those concerns and talk about the players that got to really step up.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, we're going to talk about let's talk about some of those concerns right now, Brian, and we'll talk about, we did touch on this yesterday, but is field corner going to be a nice complement to what Benjamin Morrison is doing on the other side, right? And there's a heck of a battle between 2 really good players going on right now. I feel good about that position. I do, but it's still a question mark because neither one of those guys has been asked on a consistent basis to be the starter and to be the dude on that side of the football. I mean, they had a start. They each had a start, I think once last year, came in on a rotational basis, things like that. But as you and I have discussed on numerous occasions, it's a lot easier to come in for a spot start or to be a rotational player than it is to be the starter, be the guy, be the dude, right? And so whoever it is going to get tested, right? Because everybody is going to have number 20 circled on their report, right? I mean, on your game plan, they're all going to have 20 circled and they're all going to have 0 circled. Yep. Yes, exactly. And so whoever's on the other side is going to get tested. And so what's your grade on that test? That's the question.
Here's an interesting aspect of that, Vince, is you've got 2 stars coming back, but they're on opposite sides of the field.
Which I have noticed
is
before.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, and how does that impact things?
Sure.
What do you do? Because it'd be one thing if Xavier was the boundary safety. And you're like, okay, you got Xavier and Benjamin over here.
Right. We're not going over there. Just
or if they're both to the field, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, we're just gonna figure out what we can do to attack the boundary.
Exactly.
So you look at it that way, Vince, and it is kind of interesting because it's not quite as easy to avoid
talent, to avoid the superstars.
Yeah, it's not quite as easy.
Yeah, but
it can be done. Good coaches will do it. Steve Sarkisian will figure out how to attack your non-stars.
Sure.
And he'll find ways to put your stars in position to be successful. And heck, even somewhat okay coaches can do it. I was never a big fan of the offensive coaching staff at Clemson. The 2-man combination of Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. They had great talent, but they weren't great coordinators. But they were smart enough to know, hey guys, 27's out. Let's go at that guy. You know what I mean? Hey, I don't see Julian Love on the field. Him and Troy Pride have been locking us down all game. Let's try to do something here. And that's exactly what they did. And good coaches good coach like Kalen DeBoer. If Notre Dame has to play Alabama in the postseason, I promise you he's going to be able to find ways to attack the positions that aren't being manned by Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison, especially when those guys aren't on the field.
Sure.
Because they're getting breathers. So you're going to have to play well in those other positions. And the field cornerback position especially is going to be a big one because teams are going to go at that position early and often, in my opinion, and try to find ways to beat them one-on-ones. I mean, I guarantee you that that Texas A&M, if they're smart, and I think Colin Klein is, when he sees number 7 at cornerback, he's going to say, we're going to run some double moves and some post-snap switches because this guy's super aggressive,
yeah.
And he's not a burner. And if we can get him to bite, we can get it over top of him. I would. That's absolutely what I would do.
Sure.
And if I would do it, you don't think Colin Klein's going to have some answers for that? You know what I mean? Who's a pretty good offensive coordinator, did a really nice job at Kansas State. That's the reason Marcus Freeman interviewed him for the OC job at Notre Dame when Tommy Rees left, so that's going to be a big thing. And then obviously Christian Gray's got all the talent in the world, Vince, but can he put it together and be that guy?
Exactly.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Right. We think we have a good idea of
love the talent.
Headed. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Love the talent. But
right.
Look, a lot of this stuff, Vince, is, we're 23 days from the opener. This is about, okay, yeah, the talent's there, guys. I love the roster, but it's show me time. We're in show me mode now. And I think 100%. Christian Gray's got all the talent in the world. Benjamin Morrison had all the talent in the world, but am I right about him? Like, I thought I was right about him, but we didn't really know till he got into the season and proved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I look like a genius. You know what I mean?
We'll
nice ignore the guys that I thought were going to be good that didn't turn out to be good, or the guys that I didn't think were going to be good that turned out to be good. We're going to focus on this one that I got right. Okay.
Right. Exactly. 100%.
But the point is, you got to go out and show it.
Yeah.
Love the talent. You got to go out and show it. We thought last summer, you and I talked to Xavier Watts, breakout player. He can be a star, all that kind of stuff. Got to show it. And he did. And a lot of guys on defense did. But offensively, they didn't show it. I mean, we think Sam Hartman's could be really, really good here with the, freshman class is going to help. I think Jaden Thomas is ready to take off. Tobias Merriweather was one of my breakout players last year. Very good about him, all these type of guys. And guess what? They didn't step up and pan out. Somebody did in the chat said, Brian, you were wrong on Caden Madden. No, I wasn't. I don't know what crack you're smoking, but I did not think Caden Madden was going to be very good, and he wasn't. So I don't know what is being talked about there, but
I was definitely right, by the way.
Yeah. I don't know what that dude's smoking.
Which then I was so right on Caden Madden that it made me wrong.
He did just say he was trolling me. So I was like, okay, good save, the Shark 83, good save.
But I was so right on Caden Madden that it made me wrong on Marshall later. That was the problem. That was the problem.
Yes. But the point is, Vince, there's talent there, but is it going to play to the expectations? And will it play to expectations in the big moments? Those are things that we're going to have to find out. Right. So I wouldn't say it's a concern. It's a question. And a question isn't always a negative. A question can simply be a lack of evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And, speaking of a lack of evidence with this linebacking core and, everything that we think they are and what they can be and all of the things. And, just, hey, go back and listen to our linebacker show. Okay. But
2 days ago.
Yeah, exactly. Just go take a listen because we really broke down what we think the linebackers can do and all of those things. But in this particular conversation, the linebackers are going to be an important piece, not only at times in the pass rush, but then also in pass coverage. And to be honest with you, Notre Dame hasn't been fantastic at the linebacker position in pass coverage over the last few years. I think they've gotten more athletic, and I think they're going to be a little bit better than that this year.
Last year, they were at least better at rushing the quarterback.
Right.
Which helped. They still weren't good in coverage. They weren't bad.
But they weren't great. Good. Yeah, right.
And part of that's length. And and Drake Bowen just hasn't been asked to do that a whole lot in his career. So the question about linebacker in the pass game is twofold, Vince. It's will they be able to rush the quarterback as effectively or hopefully better than last year's linebackers? It's question number one. But at the same time, question number two is you can't always blitz. You're going to have to drop in coverage at times.
Yes.
And can they handle that? Are they going to, like last year, great point, Vince, was, they weren't great in coverage, but they never gave up that uncovered wheel route. And teams tried it. They never gave up that uncovered seam route. Teams tried it, but they were at least where they needed to be to where it was, you were going to have to make a good throw to beat them. And so that was good. They did their job. They didn't always do it great, but they did their job. And when how good everything else was, it was kind of, can this group do that?
Right.
Right. Can they do that? Can they be effective rushing the quarterback? Can they handle coverage? Can they, not have blown assignments? Those are going to be questions that, again, just like corner, Vince, it's not a talent question. I have zero questions about the talent of Drake Bowen and Kingston Villamasa and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Alsbury and Jack Kaiser. Zero questions about their physical gifts.
Sure.
I have questions about their experience. And even Jack Kaiser experience playing the position he's going to play now. To where are they going to be able to consistently get the job done and get the job done when it matters most? Those are legitimate questions you have to answer.
Yeah.
Right. Tools are there, but
absolutely.
Right. Can they
still got to see it? Got to see it. And the final piece of the puzzle in the quote unquote concerns area or question marks that need to be answered is, can they get a consistent pass rush from the front four and the defensive line? And can they take that to another level? Because look, we've had questions about Viper. Obviously, we have brand new defensive ends. You're getting your defensive tackles back, but I would love for them to be even a little bit more disruptive in the pass game than they were before. And so it's still a question mark as a whole. Can this defensive line, with their depth and everything else they've got going on, get some pressure on the quarterback as well? And that will obviously affect the pass game defensively.
It's such an underrated part of it, but I remember watching the Broncos in 2015 and watching the Super Bowl against Cam Newton. And you're thinking like, well, I don't know how this is going to go. How this game's going to go. Because you got this great defense against this great offense, talented quarterback, throwing for a lot of yards, rushing for a lot of yards, scoring a lot of points. And Denver's offense is just a hot mess. I mean, because Peyton just couldn't throw the ball really anymore. And it just wasn't a great situation. If you can't stop Cam, this could be a problem. This could be a problem. I mean, Vince, this is a team that in the postseason that year, the Panthers, who finished 17-1 before the Super Bowl, won their first playoff game 31-24, and won the NFC Championship game 49-15. I mean, they were ripping people up,
man.
They scored at least 31 points in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of their last 9 games, they scored at least 31 points. In the NFL, that's a lot of scoring.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and one of those games was late in the year against Atlanta, in a game that, if I remember correctly, that they had already clinched home field, and it just didn't matter a ton. But you got to stop this Cam Newton guy. And how do you do that? Well, Denver showed you how to do that. And Cam Newton was never the same player after that. It was, you got to pressure him from everywhere. From everywhere. You got to be able to get after the quarterback. And so when the game mattered most, and they did the same thing, Denver's defense did the same thing in the NFC or in the AFC playoffs that year, Vince, to Tom Brady. They confused the heck out of Tom Brady. I mean, if you think about that Broncos team that year, Vince, to win a Super Bowl, the Broncos had to beat Ben Roethlisberger, Tom Brady, and in his prime, Cam Newton. And they held those teams to 16, 18, and 10 points. Why? At a phenomenal pass rush.
Yeah.
And that allowed their really good corners to play aggressively and stop those teams. A big pass rush can be that neutralizer to a team that maybe has more skill talent than you have. And what we don't know is, can this team do that? And last year's defense could not always do that. As good as it was, Vince, they couldn't get to the quarterback on the downs that mattered most against the Buckeyes. They couldn't get Caleb Williams to the ground in 2022. They did in 2023 and made him, I mean, like, no, Caleb Williams' how he is viewed by fans, in my opinion, was completely changed that night. It was always, he's great on a bad team, But after that night, it was like, okay, what did I just watch? That guy, maybe he's not as good as people think. And he is very, very, very good. But Notre Dame not only made him look human, they made him look awful.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it just, you've got to be second half against Ohio State in 2022. I mean, they made C.J. Stroud work for so much of what he did. But the fact is they couldn't get to him in the second half enough, and he was able to make some throws to win that game.
Yeah.
He didn't have to throw for 400 yards. He only threw for like 230 something that game.
But he showed his mettle, man.
Exactly. He showed himself to be a guy that can make money throws in that game.
Yeah.
And, you know, they couldn't get him to the ground. He had some scrambles where he got out of the pocket and made throws because they couldn't get to him.
Yeah.
So, yes, in those moments, you have to be able to get to the quarterback. And, again, look at the last 2 years against USC. 2022, couldn't bring Caleb down. Coverage is actually pretty good that game. Couldn't bring Caleb down. Couldn't contain him. He goes off. You lose the game despite throwing for a bunch of yards and moving the ball. Year 2, you blow them out. Why? What was the big difference? Caleb couldn't. I mean, you were just in his face the whole night long.
He was seeing ghosts
the whole night long
by the end of the night. There's no doubt about
those ghosts were the dudes in his face.
But you know what I mean? Like, I mean, there was
George there.
They were coming from all directions, and he just didn't even know what to do with himself. And he was throwing the ball before he even got pressure at times because he was so afraid of the pressure that he had been receiving all night long. You know what I mean? And so he's throwing off his back foot. It was glorious to watch until the Bears drafted him.
But can they do that on the bigger stage against good teams?
Right, absolutely.
And good lines. And it doesn't have to be, he had 8 sacks in the title game against Ohio State. No, it's like, but can you make the pressures when they matter? Can you, that's what comes down to making those big stops. Yeah, we struggled all night long. I mean, look, I grew up in the 80s and 90s when some of the best pass rushers ever played the game played. And, you wouldn't hear Lawrence Taylor's name a whole game, but in the fourth quarter when the game was on the line, sorry, LT's is going to do it.
Yeah.
Bruce Smith was that way. Reggie White was that way.
White, yeah.
As a Broncos fan, I've seen some of those, Neil Smith, Alfred Williams on those 97, 98 teams. That Broncos team gave up a lot of yards to Brett Favre, but what were they able to do? They were able to get some pressures on him that forced turnovers early in the game, allowed you to pull away. They were able to get pressure on him on that last fourth down to force him to, he's got to throw off his back foot, allows John Mobley to break up the pass because it was off target. Why? Because there's pressure in his face to throw off his back foot. So even though he made some money throws and big time throws and had some, outplayed Elway in that game statistically, the difference is when the Broncos needed a drive, they couldn't get to Elway, and he made the plays and Terrell Davis made the plays. When the Packers needed a drive, they couldn't protect the quarterback, and the Broncos won that football game. Right? I mean, so that's what we're talking about is when it matters, can you do it? And I could list a whole bunch of pass rushers that you and I grew up watching, man, but they made those – they got to the quarterback when they needed to get to the quarterback. I mean, when it mattered most, you've got those guys to get to the quarterback. Von Miller was that way when he was in his prime with the Broncos. And him and DeMarcus Ware, that's what made that team so good is they could just – when they needed a pressure, they could get the pressure. And I even think the first big pressure for Denver in that game, Von Miller brought it, but I think Malik Jackson's the one that recovered the fumble in the end zone for the Broncos. So that's going to be a big key is can you pressure the quarterback when it matters most? And that's something this defense is going to have to prove that it can do. Because I don't know that they did that last year. I don't think that they did, honestly. And they weren't able to make those stops, and they needed to make those stops in the biggest games.
Yeah.
I don't think it's entirely their fault, because again, you held Louisville to 7 points in the first half. Your offense should have pulled away by then.
Should have.
But they didn't. And your offense should have scored more than 14 points against against Ohio State. That's not your fault. But on that last drive, you had your chances and you couldn't make the plays.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to show that.
Before we exit the defensive talk on pass defense, let's quickly go over some guys that are going to be key to the success of the pass defense this year in 2024. And we do have a few guys that we want to highlight. And so let's go over those guys right now, Brian, and we'll lead it off with the Viper position, which, we've talked about the Viper position a lot, obviously, and the question marks that are there. But when we're talking about pass rush, Viper is going to be very important, not only for getting hands on the quarterback and pressures and all of those things, but also at times dropping into coverage and doing a decent job in that. Now, it's not going to be all the time, obviously, but when that does happen, they can't be a liability out there either.
Right.
And so, we're talking about Botelho and Traore, Boubacar, and what that looks like at the Viper position. Can those guys contribute to the defense? You made a great point the other day when we were talking about the defensive line and how great the defensive line was with zero help from the Viper position. Zero. So can they at least contribute in a positive way to the defensive line and then obviously overall to the pass defense as well?
They have to get production from that position this year, Vince.
Yeah.
Do they need it to make the playoff? No, I don't think so. They can get to the college football playoff without the Vipers being much better than last year, but they're not going to go anywhere meaningful once they get there.
Exactly.
You're not going to beat Georgia if that position still gives you nothing. You're not going to beat Ohio State if that position gives you nothing. You're not going to beat Texas if that position gives you nothing. It's just the reality of it. But it really comes down to Botelho and his veteran presence,
sure,
and Boubacar and his elite potential. You need them both to kind of help you out this year. And I don't care if neither of them has more than 4.5 individual sacks, as long as they both have at least 4 individual sacks. You know what I mean? And it's about the tandem. Maybe one game it's Botelho. Maybe the next game it's Boubacar. And then the other part too, Vince, which is not discussed about a ton, is teams like to run the ball into the boundary. And they're the force play. They're the support force, whatever the call is, depending on what the call is. But they're those guys that are the edge stoppers, need to be the edge stoppers when you're running into the boundary. And so it impacts that as well. But when you look at the pass rushing aspect of it, which is what this part of the show is about, they've got to give more pressure, got to give more consistent pressure. Those two kids, to me, Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore, could ultimately be what determine whether or not Notre Dame has an elite championship caliber D-line this year. It's going to be very good.
Right.
It's like we talked about yesterday. They're minimum, they're in the top 10. Minimum, they're 6 to 10, somewhere in there. But to be a team to be a unit that fuels look, they could be 10th and win a championship if the rest of the team is good enough. I'm saying to be good enough to drive a championship, they need to be top 5.
Sure.
To be top 5 and to get into that top 3, this position has to be way better than it was last year statistically, but then also from a clutch standpoint. Look, why do I always talk about Khalid Kareem? Was Khalid Kareem as productive of a pass rusher as Julian Okwara? Nope, not close. But you can remember every sack Khalid Kareem made because it seemed like every sack he ever made was a clutch moment. That's why you remember Khalid Kareem. That's why he was such an important part of that team, is because he was going to sack, a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, a pressure, something. When the game was on the line, you just kind of felt like, don't worry, 53's at it, got it. Lohi Gilman had a lot of that to him. But that's the thing, is these guys are going to have to give you that, Vince. Have to. If this team's going to compete for a championship.
Right. The next guy that we had on our list is a guy we talked about a bunch actually earlier on in the show, but I definitely want to bring him up because he is extremely important. It's Mr. Gray at corner, right? And he's going to be extremely important, obviously, to the pass defense because he's going to get picked on, I would think, a lot.
Him and Jade Mickey both.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And so, we have to bring him up. Again, we talked about him a bunch earlier, but he's still a very, very important piece. We think he is going to end up starting there. And even if he doesn't, that position is going to be extremely important. But yeah, I have a lot of confidence, but again, we need to see it, and he's going to be extremely important to the success of the pass defense for sure.
The reason I put him here alone and not him and Mickey is because Gray is the one guy of that group that has a chance to be a star caliber player.
Sure.
Right. He's the guy that has a chance to kind of not just be hold your water type of player, but to be a difference maker. And what made the cornerback tandem last year was so good is not because Cam Hart was really, really good. And it's not because that Benjamin Morrison was really good. It's that Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison were both really, really good.
Right.
And that's much better than, I think that's something that hurt Ohio State at times last year when their defense got in trouble. and it is because teams could avoid Denzel Burke and have success.
Yeah.
And last year's like, okay, if you're not going to go at Benjamin Morrison, who do you go at? Cam Hart, Xavier Watts? Like, your options are kind of limited here. And they need him to step up. And I'm not saying he has to be Cam Hart, but he has to be pretty good. They need him to grow up fast. They need Christian Gray to grow up in a hurry as a player.
I think he will, but we still have to see it happen, obviously. So the final guy is also in the secondary. He's a transfer student. The importance of this particular position has been, I mean, the level of importance of this position has increased over the last, half decade, obviously with the transformation of offenses and things like that. But it has been a very, very good position for Notre Dame the past 2 years prior to this year. And now you have Jordan Clark coming in and assuming that nickel position, which is extremely important. I mean, extremely important. And can he kind of take the baton from the last couple of guys that have manned the corner or the nickel position and then just take it and make it his own and be as successful?
I'm glad you said that, Vince, because that is where my heart was on this, putting him on this. Nice. was my heart was there, but my head was also there. So it was both of them. And when I mean heart, I mean like the spirit of why he's on there.
Right.
And the spirit of why he's on there is twofold. The first being, this has been a strength for Notre Dame the last 2 years.
Yep.
Tariq Bracy was very good at this position 2 years ago, and Thomas Harper was very good at this position last year. Can Jordan Clark match that?
Mm-hmm.
But then practically speaking, this is the second part of why he's on this list. Well, we're going to answer the question that we've been asking the last several shows, right? Today and then on Monday when we talk DBs. Well, you can't go at Benjamin Morrison and we think Christian Gray is going to be a stud and Xavier Watts is an All-American and Rod Hurd's pretty flipping good. And, well, what are you going to do? Okay, you're going to go with the linebackers and you're going to go with the nickel. Because of the 5 guys we anticipate starting, I would argue that Jordan Clark is the least talented.
Okay.
Now, he's smart.
Sure.
He brings a lot of value. And this doesn't mean he lacks talent. But when you're as good as Notre Dame is in the secondary, it's like we talked about, somebody's got to be last. Somebody's got to be the least athletic. You're not all the same. And I would say he's the least talented of the group. Doesn't mean he's a bad player at all. But if I'm an opposing offensive football team, especially if I have, I'm thinking of some of the bigger games that they play this year, especially if I have Colin Lacey and I've got at Louisville, and especially if I've got Zachariah Branch, I am going to do as much as I can to get Zachariah Branch matched up against Jordan Clark. I got a lot more chance of success doing that than I have of trying to put Zachariah Branch against Benjamin Morrison. I'm just going to do that. And then I'm also, if you're smart, I'm going to try to find some ways to get Deuce Robinson, who's 6'6", matched up against Jordan Clark and go at him that way.
Sure.
Of all the guys on the team, that's the one I'm taking my chances with. Partly because they're also lower percentage passes, slants, ins, overs, crossers, things like that. I'm going to make Jordan Clark beat us if I'm an opposing offensive coach. Now, that's not saying Jordan Clark can't step up to the table, but I'm saying he's going to need to. He's going to have the best season of his career. And the good news for Jordan Clark is he's surrounded by better talent than he's ever played with. He can be a complementary piece, but he's going to have to play well, Vince, because the nickel is such an important – I mean, we talked about this. The nickel's on the field a lot more than the rover is. And so he's going to have to be on the field, especially in big moments. And especially, I mean, he's going to definitely be on the field a lot against Texas if they play Texas. He's going to definitely be on the field a lot against Georgia and Ohio State.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
They're going to need those guys in the field a ton.
Yep.
And can he do that? Can he step up and be good in those moments? Because he's going to get picked on.
Sure.
In my opinion, by the better teams in the schedule. I have no doubt about that. Because look, last year against Ohio State, as good as Jack Kaiser was last year, you know how many snaps Jack Kaiser played against Ohio State? 10.
Really?
10.
I did not know that.
No. Because Thomas Harper played 50.
They were in nickel. Yeah, they were in nickel.
They're in nickel the whole game.
Yeah.
So Jack only played 10 snaps that game.
That's crazy. One of your better linebackers, to be honest with you, only played 10 snaps. Like, and I understand why, but that just blows my mind, to be perfectly honest with you. So
yeah, and I think most of those were like third down type of
sure,
snaps.
I'm sure they were.
So I mean, that's just that, but that's kind of where they were last year with the makeup of this team. You know, against Riley Leonard, Jack only played 16 snaps. That's it.
But that, I mean, but that also, you know, goes to what I said earlier about the fact that, you know, offenses are changing and defenses have to change along with them. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to compete. And this is an incredibly important position in that regard with the evolution of offenses and defenses. So that's why this position is super important.
Right. And so that's why Jordan Clark is a key to success for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
The better he plays, the better this secondary is going to be because teams are going to go after him. And again, this is not to say Jordan Clark's not a good football player. Guys, this is the case on good defenses. When you have the talent Notre Dame has, somebody's got to be last. Somebody's got to be the hey, you know, I can't go at that guy. Got to go with somebody. We can't just, you know, look, we're, you know, A&M's not going to sit there and be like, hey, you know what? I don't think we can beat Notre Dame, so we're just going to forfeit and just get ready for our next game. Look, they're going to come out and play. They're going to go after somebody. Who's that going to be?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
If I'm an offensive coach and I look at all the talent Notre Dame has, that's who I'm going to try to figure out ways to beat their linebackers in the pass game, and I'm going to try to find ways to beat their nickel in the pass game. I'm not last year. I'd have tried to find ways. How can I get DJ Brown in coverage? How can I get Ramon Henderson in coverage? How can I get the linebacker? That's who I'm going at last year. I'm not going at Cam Hart. I'm not going at Benjamin Morrison. I'm not going at Xavier Watts. I might have gone at Xavier early. I would have quickly found out that was dumb and gone at somebody else. This year, Jordan Clark in Ohio State said, we're going after Thomas Harper when it matters most. And they beat him 4th and 7. Right? That's how important his position is. Jordan Clark's got to make that play. And so it's not about Jordan Clark only. It's about the nature of that position.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And he just happens to be the one manning it. That's going to do it for our overview on the pass defense and how we think it's going to shape out. Questions, comments, concerns, all that fun stuff. And so thanks for hanging out with us. We've got one more segment to hit, so don't go anywhere. But before we get to that part, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell. Share with your family and friends, and, of course, jump on the boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com. You won't be sorry. I can promise you that. So boards.irishbreakdown.com.